In this video, we're going to talk about all the different ways you can apply effects efficiently to your projects in After Effects. So to start, I'm going to make the timeline panel active and begin playback by pressing the spacebar so we can preview the project. And as you can see, we have an animated title. I'll press the spacebar again to stop playback because I want to add a little more visual interest into the scene. Let's start by adding a little bit of a blur to the background layer. Notice the layer is numbered 7, but we appear to only have 3 layers in the comp. So if we look in the top middle section of the timeline, you can see I've already enabled the Shy button. If we toggle that off, you'll see all the extra layers required to build this project. I hid those extra layers because I wanted you to just focus on the 3 layers, but still be able to work in a quote-unquote real-world project. Let's make sure and enable the Shy button. And to get started adding some visual interest into the scene, let's work on applying our first effect. But before we do that, it's important to understand there are 2 different ways you can apply effects to layers in After Effects. The first way, since the layer is selected, you can go up to the menu bar and click Effect. Then you'll see a list of different kinds of effects already organized into groups. I'd like to apply a blur, so I'll navigate down to the Blur group and select Fast Box Blur. Now that the effect has been applied, you can view it up here in the upper left corner of the interface, in the Effect Controls panel. Let's change the first setting for the blur radius to a value of around 12. I like to scrub values so I can see a preview of what's happening in the composition panel. To toggle the visibility of the applied effect on and off, simply click on the FX button in the upper left corner of the Effect Controls panel, or down here in the Switches section of the timeline. Since this blur effect has blurred across the whole image, let's bring some clarity back into the scene by removing the blur from the middle of the composition using a mask path. Go up to the Shape tools, and if you don't see the rectangle tool, just click and hold on the Shape tool until you see the rectangle pop up and make sure you choose that. With the rectangle tool active, I'll start off on the left edge off the side of the composition canvas, and then click and drag a box over the middle area, making sure to drag all the way across the composition. Notice that's masked both the effect and the layer. To apply the mask only to the effect, open the effects in the timeline, open the blur effect, and then scroll down to the bottom of the options, and you'll see these plus and minus buttons. Click the plus button, and now you notice the mask is only masking the blur effect instead of the entire image. Now to invert the mask, I'm going to press M on the keyboard to open the mask options and change the mode pull down from add to subtract. Since the blur has a hard edge here in the composition panel, I'll press MM on my keyboard to open the mask options and scrub on the feather setting to a setting of about 140 pixels. Now let's preview the animation a little bit. Click on the current time indicator in the timeline and scrub it down to the right, and you'll notice the mask is moving along with the layer. And that's because this is a 3D layer and there is actually a camera in the scene. If we turn off Shy, you can see there's the camera. To have the effect apply over the scene and not move with the camera, we can simply add the effect to a 2D layer. To get started with that process, go up to the menu bar and choose Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. An adjustment layer is a blank layer to which you can add effects, and those effects will only make changes to layers below the adjustment layer vertically in the stack of layers here in the timeline. That being said, let's go ahead and drag the adjustment layer above all the other layers in the timeline. To further refine this scene, let's add a vignette by darkening the corners of the composition using a levels adjustment. And this time, we'll apply the necessary effect to the adjustment layer by using the second method for applying effects. We'll search for the effect by name in the Effect and Presets panel. Just click once in the search field and type the name of the effect you're looking for, in this case, Levels. Once the effect has been revealed, just drag it from the Effects and Presets panel right onto your adjustment layer in the timeline. To darken the image, click on the black input slider here in the lower left corner of the histogram and drag it towards the right. As you reposition the arrow, notice how it's adjusting the input black setting. Click and drag the middle arrow to adjust the gamma settings as well. To have the effect only darken the corners, Making sure the adjustment layer is still selected, let's go up to the shape tools and choose the ellipse shape. Let go of your mouse for a second and then double click on the ellipse shape in the toolbar to automatically apply the mask to the adjustment layer. With the mask applied, let's look at the mask options here in the timeline and change its drop-down menu from Add to Subtract to invert the mask and give us the darkened corners. To feather the mask, let's collapse its options, then open them again, and then just scrub on the feather parameter to add a nice soft feather transition from the dark areas to the light areas. I ended up with a value of around 225. Now we can go ahead and press the spacebar to preview the animation, and we can see we've definitely increased the amount of interest and depth in the scene. Let's keep going by adding a slight color tint to the scene. And rather than adding another adjustment layer, this time let's add a layer solid. So press the spacebar to stop playback if you haven't already done so. Then go up to the menu bar and choose Layer, New, Solid. In the options, click the Make Comp Size button, and you can choose any color you like for the solid for right now, and then click OK. Notice since the layer's at the top of the layer hierarchy, it's taken over the entire composition. To add our gradient to the solid, make sure the solid's selected and then go right back up to the menu bar, and this time choose Effect, Generate, Gradient Ramp. So let's take a second to talk about the order of operations. Right now, After Effects has created our layer solid at the top of the layer hierarchy first. Then, after creating the solid, it's applied the gradient ramp settings. So we're only seeing the gradient ramp. Now, to change the colors of the gradient, I want to use the original color from the text in our scene. So let's turn off the visibility of that layer in the timeline. And let's go back up to the Effect Controls panel and grab the eyedropper to the right of the start color. And let's click once in the first letter of our title to sample that kind of butternut orange color. Now to match both of these colors, let's grab the dropper from the end color and sample the start color we just set. I'm doing this so the saturations will match when we adjust the colors. So let's click once in the drop well next to the start color, and let's go to the slider here and rotate the hue up a little bit until we get to a nice bright yellow. Once you've found a yellow that you like, go ahead and click OK. Now just so we can see what's going on with our layer now, let's turn its visibility back on in the timeline. In the Effect Controls, go to the Ramp Shape pull down and change it from Linear Ramp to Radial Ramp. And then let's change the start of the ramp by clicking on the Target button to the right of the word Start of Ramp, and click in the middle of the composition to set the start, and then go to the end of the ramp target, click on that, and then let's click off the lower left corner of the composition so that the orange is on the outside edge and the yellow is right there in the middle. At this point, I want to take our analysis in the order of operations one step further by applying one more effect to this layer. In the menu bar, go to Effect, Noise and Grain, and choose the noise effect to add some noise into the gradient. Go ahead and increase the amount of noise so we can actually see the effect taking place. So right now, After Effects is generating the layer solid, then it's generating our gradient effect, and then underneath that, it is applying the noise effect. You can see the order of operations in the Effect Controls panel work from the top down. If we change the order of those effects by clicking on the noise and then dragging it above the gradient, notice now since the gradient has been applied after the noise, it's taken over the scene and we don't see the noise at all. Now I don't necessarily want that noise in the project, so with that currently selected, let's just press delete on our keyboard and that'll delete the effect out of the Effect Controls panel. In order to change how this gradient interacts with all the layers below, let's go down to the button in the bottom of the timeline and toggle it until our switches and modes have switched to modes. And let's change the mode drop-down menu to color. Notice the layer of the blend modes has been applied after the effects in the order of operations. Since we have so many new layers in the project, let's clean things up by adding names to the layers. Select the topmost layer and press Enter on your keyboard and just type Gradient to rename. Press Enter when you're done editing that text. Repeat the process for the adjustment layer below. Select it, press Enter on your keyboard, and let's rename this one to Vignette. Since the gradient is tinting absolutely everything in the scene, let's click on that layer and drag it down in the timeline so it's both below the vignette and the original text. It's important that the title text remain its original butternut orange kind of color. So let's go ahead and blend the effect back into the scene by pressing T to open the opacity, and let's bring the value way down to a setting of around 15. If we toggle the layer off and on, you can see we've added a very nice subtle tint into the scene. Now the last thing I'd like to show you is how we can take a layer mask from one layer and apply it to another layer without using a track mask. So go ahead and select the concrete texture PSD in the timeline, and if we toggle the visibility of that layer off and on, you can see the texture is going across the entire image. Now I'd like this texture to only be applied in the corners, much like the vignette layer. So with the concrete texture layer selected, I'll go up to the menu bar and go to Effect, Channel, and choose the Set Matte Effect. Starting at the top of the effect, let's click on the first drop down to the right of the text Take Matte from Layer. Notice we can choose any layer in the composition. I'll go ahead and choose the vignette layer. And the next drop down to the right allows us to choose masks instead of source. Now you can see the concrete texture is only in the corners because it's referencing the matte being generated from the mask on the vignette layer. Whenever you apply an effect that references another layer, like the Set Matte effect or the Displacement Map effect, those effects can pull values from other layers regardless of the location of those layers in the layer stack in your timeline. So when it comes to applying effects to your After Effects projects, as you can see, you have a whole host of different options. Now, whether you apply that effect directly to a layer or choose to utilize something like an adjustment layer, the most important thing to remember or consider is how the effects are going to work in the order of operations.